And it's a real pleasure to present our findings with my colleague, Francine Mullen. Now, Francine, you probably know her because she is the program coordinator for the Utah Avalanche Center. And her efforts in avalanche education and awareness and trailhead, I mean, they are like no other, right? She is just crushing it with all of her outreach. She's going to begin her second season here, and we're just so thrilled to be working side by side with her. Such a busy person because Francine is going to be graduating this semester from MSU. She's going to be attaining a degree in environmental sciences. She's got an emphasis in spatial analysis. Now, Francine and I collaborated with Travis Morrison, and he's just another remarkably talented young member of our avalanche community. Tonight, though, it's just going to be Francine and I. Yeah, Travis trusted us with the reins on this presentation, so yeah, hang on and buckle up, right? And hopefully we will continue in the spirit of Travis Morrison being here. So what we're going to talk about is integrating technology and numbers and head counts, and more importantly, messaging. And what the messaging is with the Rider Uniter program is that this was born out of the desire for forecasters to know that their messaging is resonating with you, the user. And this came about during a trail run 2 summers ago. And as I'm starting to crest a ridge with my partner, he says, hey, I got a question for you. With COVID, you think there'll be a lot of people in the backcountry? And so I had to grab a patent Bruce Tremper line, and I said, oh yeah, it's going to get loved to death, right? And it's like, wow, how vague is that? I want some raw numbers. The guy I'm running with is a numbers guy. And we start to formulate all of this in our minds. He says, yeah, numbers. Boy, if you could just get raw numbers, and maybe we pass through a beam, and that gives us some numbers. And I'm thinking, that's great, and it's a great start. But raw numbers really don't tell us much about avalanche education and how we as forecasters in an organization are delivering our message, especially during times of elevated avalanche hazard. So what we needed were not only raw numbers, but we wanted to also take the deep dive and see if our users at least had rudimentary avalanche gear, at least had an avalanche transceiver. So this is where the Rider Uniter program sort of launched. And one thing that we know, and Bruce is absolutely right, just getting to the mountains is getting loved to death, right? I mean, it is nearly impossible on a big powder day to get up into any one of our canyons. Now, this is just a snapshot of how many people are traveling, right? So we know this, but what we really want is that data of how many people are going into the backcountry. How do we accurately count that? Well, here's the good news. We partnered with an amazing organization, Wasatch Backcountry Alliance, and they were already using TRAFx people counters, and that gives raw numbers. There's 17 of these people counters in Little Cottonwood, Big Cottonwood, and Mill Creek canyons. So we could at least, if we formulated another counting system that counted whether or not people had a transmitting beacon, then we could kind of correlate these two things. So we're getting raw numbers, and then we're getting people who are also wearing a transceiver. And if we could extrapolate those numbers of people wearing a transceiver, then maybe we can assume that at least there's some rudimentary avalanche knowledge going on. I know it's a big ask, but let's kind of compartmentalize all of this. So what we did then as a team between myself and Francine and Travis, you see, a guy like me has got to surround himself with very smart people to pull this off. And yeah, we did this brilliantly as a team. So Francine is crunching the numbers and the data. She's putting this all into some sort of geophysical, spatial kind of thing. And Travis, what is he doing? He's making the sausage with the electronics. So this is the beauty of this thing, right? And the delivery, of course, is across 14 total trailheads. We've got 10 traditional backcountry, 3 resort access, and then 1 motorized. And we're verifying all of these numbers with the TRAFx counters and then Our beacon counters, of course you're familiar with the avalanche terrain and RU beeping stations, and so we're correlating all of that information. And now, it's a real pleasure to invite a very special guest. Francine, why don't you step up here and let everybody know what your findings were?
Awesome. Thank you, Craig. That was such a phenomenal intro. So like any good home science project, it started in Travis Morrison's garage, and I'm very grateful for him because without him, we wouldn't have been able to build our small suite of low-cost trailhead transceiver counters. So like Craig mentioned, with help from the Wasatch Backcountry Alliance, and they're already in place TRAFx trailhead counters that were all throughout the Wasatch, we were able to validate our numbers and ground truth, more or less, which is super exciting. And additionally, on top of that, our sample size was really large. So statistically speaking, it proved for solid results. Additionally, the purpose of the transceiver data, as Craig was mentioning, we can start to assume that if people are wearing transceivers, then they've got to know at least about avalanches. So the idea here was to utilize this data to understand, how many people are entering the backcountry and who is wearing a transceiver or not. So this figure that you're looking at right now shows the data collected from the RU beeping trailhead signs, WBA's TRAFx data, and then a small data set if people were wearing a transceiver or not. And we'll kind of get into that more moving forward. So the good news is the initial findings were we had good agreement with WBA's TRAFx data, which is awesome. And we found that we had the best agreement on the weekdays. So that's great. That was really good to hear. We saw that our systems were working, they were being deployed, and they were, outputting similar data to a system that had already been there for a while. Additionally, on the weekends, we assumed or put together that we were probably undercounting. And how that worked was when you have a large group pass by that beam, sometimes the sensor sensitivity wasn't high enough to pick up multiple people in those large groups. So sometimes 4 people walking by in a group would only count as 1. So we were seeing really large numbers over the weekends, which was expected, but we anticipate we were undercounting. And we mentioned the use of seeing if people were wearing transceivers or not. And this was a little bit of a challenge for us. We dealt with a lot of road bumps and learning curves like any good pilot year program. And so our data set of transceiver to people wasn't as robust as we probably would have liked, but we had a lot of great learning outcomes. Some issues we had were power outages that occurred regularly because the batteries were probably not as big as they should have been. Additionally, during harsh conditions, we had to be really on top of the snow. If we had a unit go down, we had to make sure it was fixed before a storm. And if it wasn't fixed, we were waiting for that storm to pass. We also had a couple signs get ran over by snowcats, which was a bummer, and I would like to take a minute to thank my colleague and friend Joey Manship for all the work he puts in to the trailhead beacon signs. If you see him out there, give him a high five, tell him thank you. He's usually carrying a shovel, but he's incredible and amazing. So moving forward, some of these solutions is putting the actual computer itself into a second enclosure to prevent moisture from getting in and short-circuiting. Additionally, the use of larger batteries, as well as continuously testing through the summer. Yes, we work all summer here. It's great. So we have this massive data set, and we're all at a coffee shop for multiple hours, jazzed on espresso, trying to figure out what to do next. And we're thinking about variables moving forward. So we started kind of an exploratory study to dovetail off of the data we had collected. And this was published in the Avalanche Review this last October. So we're just giving you the brief abstract synopsis of that. So we took the data from just people and merged our trailhead use with recent snow observations from MesoWest, our avalanche forecast, and then our recent human-triggered avalanche observations. And then once all this was merged together, we began to look at the interactions between all of these things. The cool thing is we went into this with a fairly open mind and expected to more or less quantify things we already knew. We just wanted to put numbers to it. So we're going to break down this kind of scary graph here. The first section of this, we are looking at, just population people, which is identified in the black line. We can see we have a lot of fluctuation. The gray shading indicates our spatial range. So when the shading is larger, we have I'm sorry. When our shading is larger, it shows that we are confined to fewer trailheads. And then when it is smaller, we are spread out through the Wasatch. And it's important to note that this data was collected for the entirety of all of our trailheads that we were collecting data at. The blue bars show our powder days or recent snow. So we can see an increase in usership and then kind of a little lull and then increase again. But we noticed that increase in usership was expected right around those powder days and on the weekends. So moving into there, we looked at increasing forecast danger. And we took the average danger rating per aspect and elevation over the entire season, one week before and after each accident. And as we heard from Carl Birkeland, it was increasing. And we started with, those lower elevations maybe being in lower hazard, but then increasing as time went on over the season. And then we have human-triggered avalanches represented in the form of a heat map. And as expected, and what we saw was there were 8 to 12 human-triggered avalanches following almost each accident, which kind of spoke volume to the sensitivity of our snowpack. And from there, I guess I'm going to pass it off to Craig, but I also just want to leave you all with, the purpose of this was to understand our users a little bit better, understand, where they were coming from while they're entering, the backcountry, and just get a better finger on the pulse. So I'm going to pass it over to Craig, and he's going to take us home with some words of wisdom.
What a remarkable team, huh? What an amazing young lady. Francine, man, I mean, the high fives that you were getting from our studio audience, pretty remarkable and deservedly so. So like I said, yeah, I surrounded myself with a lot of smart people. And what I realized through this journey is that as we came full circle, what we wanted to do with this call of action was to utilize this data so that we could take the data so we could help you, our backcountry user, our family, our backcountry community, that we could not only anticipate these trends and these patterns, but that we could better articulate our message as well. And what we found with this is pretty curious, that if we know how our users and our community and our family interpret these messages, then maybe we could better understand how to message more effectively, especially during times of complex avalanche hazard. Now, we all know the black danger rows, right? We know what was hitting the fan at that time, and we know how spooky it was. But how about these times where we have increasing hazard, or we have multiple avalanche problems, complex hazard or complex snowpack? So what we realized, we're really good at recognizing the hazard. Yeah, we're really good when we know that the rose is red or it's orange. The danger is high. On a scale of 1 to 5, yeah, it's a high. It's really scary out there. But we might not necessarily know the dragon. And I think correlating that with our findings, seeing people trends and travel trends, and then meshing that together with what Paul and Kevin found, it helps to sync that together. And I know from our end, we'll try that we can manipulate our message so that we can deliver it in a digestible form. What did we find? What was our bottom line? That sometimes maybe we roll in and we're expecting one thing. We're prepared for one thing. We're ready for that knife fight, right? We're ready for the sword battle. There's so many simplistic ways that we can go with this, so many simplistic ways that we can run with it. And maybe sometimes we show up and the bottom line is we're basically outgunned. And when something looks like that, we realize that we need to better connect with our community. We need to become more in tune with our messaging and be able to spread that throughout the entire user base. Remember I said I was surrounded by some smart people? Well, I give it all up for Francine, amazing young lady who helped to crunch all of this data, to Travis, who put all of everything together from the electronics side of things. The two of them put together a wonderful paper of research, and it was published in the first issue of this year's Avalanche Review. We made the centerfold, and it was pretty impressive. So I'm super, super proud to be in the same room as these two. And like I said earlier, I'm just here for the ride, so I'm letting them take the reins. I want to continue this journey. Everybody's contact information is up there. And you know, Fran, I've got a question for you. So why don't you come up and join me? And were there any surprises that you found as you started to crunch the data here? Yeah, definitely. I think one big surprise, and Travis and I have talked about this a lot, was our trailhead usership. After accidents, we expected it to taper off, maybe a little bit more. And in actuality, people just kept going. We saw peak usership around, I think, all 3 accidents, and it really didn't fully, plateau until Little Cottonwood Canyon closed during that really massive storm cycle in February. So that was probably the biggest, like, oh my gosh, here we go. The backcountry is definitely loved. Indeed, the backcountry is definitely loved, and we know that. And we want to share that love. We want to keep all of that cohesive, right? And I've got a question for you, Francine. Do we have any information about where or what trailheads we had our checkers at, and if the public had access to that information? Like, how can we best pass that information on so that people are counted individually rather than a group?
Oh, beautiful, beautiful question. Let's see if maybe I can go back in slides. Am I allowed to go back? No, I'm not. Okay, that's okay. So on the are you beeping signs, there's just a black pelican case that is attached to the leg, and that is the trailhead counter beam, or infrared beam, that is just counting people as it passes by. We had them at Butler Fork, Guardsman's, OLS, and Grizzly this past season, and we are still working out where they're going to go this upcoming season.
Fantastic. And remember, this is a research project. And so what we want to do with this data is we want to be able to know how we can best help out the community. And that's our bottom line with this whole, what might seem like kind of an abstract project, but it really is our boots on the ground deliverable that we can give back to you, and that we can do that in the most succinct way. Got Got a question, and maybe we could tag team this. Is there a way to extrapolate what terrain users are riding based on the trailhead?
Yeah, maybe. In my spare time, I think I'm trying to crack that code with TRAFx a little bit of using the avalanche terrain exposure scale, which if you listen to YSAW a few weeks ago, John Sykes talked about that, but more or less running with that and trying to take these trailheads and create an average terrain rating for them, whether it's simple, challenging, or complex. And then with that, comparing population changes over time. Do you have anything to add?
Yeah, so I think from a collective standpoint, right now we're just sort of in the linear phase and looking forward to both Travis and Francine being able to wrap their brains around so we can really see how people move around in the backcountry given the current avalanche hazard. What we do know, though, is where the trailhead signs and counters are placed, we can extrapolate the density of people that are there and correlate that with a hazard. So Butler, for instance, a high hazard day, I mean, where are we going? Probably Butler trees, probably some of the low angle stuff in that zone. And you know, you could see those density trends. Maybe you could see that in Grizzly Gulch as well, where there's lots of different options. So we're trying to branch out a little bit. We're trying to spread our wings a little bit with that. And I think both between the brain power of Francine and Travis, as well as implementing some great computer technology and some tools that are available to us, we're going to be able to better grasp what the real picture looks like.